Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing fantastic. Today's video we will be discussing the various types of approach plates. This will be the first video in a series on different types of approaches. Let's get right into it. Alright, so for today's video I've pulled up a bunch of charts for Vancouver International Airport. And the first chart we're going to look at is actually the ILS approach for runway 26 right. For those of you who don't know what an ILS approach is yet, don't worry. I will be talking about all the various types of approaches in the next video. But for now, we're going to just look at how to read these various charts. Alright, so the way we're going to look at this is we're going to go left to right, top to bottom. As we can see, the top here, we have the chart identifier. And then obviously which approach it's the chart for. So this is the ILS runway 26 right, as I mentioned. Then we have the airport's coordinates right here. And then the name of the airport with the ICAO code. Moving on, in the next set of boxes, we have various frequencies for the different stations you'd want to tune into as you're flying the approach. So the ATIS, or the weather. Arrival, so a bunch of frequencies for that, depending on how many sectors are online. Then we have tower. In this case, it would be North Tower, as that is there's North and South Tower at Vancouver Airport. North Tower controls the north runway, and that frequency is 119.55. And then we have ground, both north and south ground, listed there. Moving on to the next box, we have our minimum safe altitude for a 100 nautical mile radius around the airport. And in this particular case, it's 12,800 feet. So if it is VFR conditions and you have an emergency, or even IFR conditions, this altitude is guaranteed to give you at least 1,000 feet separation from the nearest obstacle within a 100-mile radius. So this would be the minimum altitude you would descend to if you have no clue where you are, except that you are within 100 miles of Vancouver. Alright, so the next box is the localizer frequency and the localizer identifier, India Romeo Delta. Then our final approach course, 263 degrees, and the final approach fix altitude. So in this case, the final approach fix is totem, and if you were on the glide path, that would be 1,520 feet. All right, so moving on to our next box here, we have the minimum safe altitude, or MSA, around the Vancouver VOR, which is this guy down here. And in this case, so these boxes represent a 25 nautical mile range. So from heading 090 to 180, it's 7,000 feet. Heading 180 to 270, it's 6,700 feet. 270 to 360 is 3,800. And 090 to 360 is 5,000. So keep in mind that these are the to radials, not the from radials. So if you were looking at your radial from the Vancouver VOR, you'd have to invert these by 180 degrees. For example, it would be this box here would become from heading 270 to heading 360, which makes sense if you're using it as a compass. Usually use the from as versus the to radials from the VOR. All right, so we're going to move on now to the horizontal representation of this approach. As we can see right off the bat, we have a few notes listed on the chart. First one is that this is a restricted area. The identifier is Charlie Yankee Alpha 133. It's from surface to 5,000 feet occasionally, and it could be higher, indicated by a NOTAM that would be published. Continuous daylight, so this is only active in daylight hours. And we also we'll go down here, and we can see that simultaneous approaches are authorized with runway 26 left, so that's the parallel runway, so you could have two aircraft going at the same time on the approaches. Then we also see localizer is only reliable within 10 degrees either side of the center line. So obviously if you are beyond that, you can't guarantee that the localizer is going to be accurate. We also see that either radar or RNAV is required to fly this approach. Most commercial airliners these days will have that. However, if you are in Cessna 172, something like that, it may be a little bit more challenging to fly this approach unless you have radar RNAV installed. We also see the altitudes of the various peaks. So for example, this peak right here is 4,774 feet. So if you're flying in this area, you just need to be cautious of the various peaks that are in the area. We can also see here, once again, the localizer frequency, 111.95, the localizer identifier, India Romeo Delta, and the Morse code for the localizer, which is right there. We also see the DME channel, 56 Yankee. All right, so moving on to this area right here, we can see our final approach fixes. Correction, sorry, the fixes on the approach. So Goreg, Agned, and Totem. And Totem is the final approach fix, so we want to be fully established by this point. And if we don't, that usually merits a go-around. So that by fully established, I mean you need to have your approach speed set, gear down, flaps set to whatever your landing flaps are, etc., etc. Also, we can see once again the final approach course of 263 degrees and various other visual waypoints around here, such as Boundary Bay Airport, King George Airport, Langley Regional. This just gives pilots a sense of other airports in the area as well, so they can know where to expect other traffic. We also see that the Vancouver VOR, like actually many airports, is not located at the airport, but rather a few miles south. And the frequency for the Vancouver VOR is 115.9. That's the Morse code there. And the DME channel is 106. All right, so the last thing to discuss on the approach plate here, or at least the horizontal portion of it, is the missed approach. So if we were to go around for whatever reason, or we are instructed to go around by ATC, we would generally fly heading 294 as soon as possible. Again, unless we were given a separate set of instructions by ATC. But if we weren't, we'd fly heading 294 and then intercept the 261 radial from Pitt Meadows, which the frequency is listed here with the identifier and Morse code. Once we intercept that, we would fly along heading 261 until we reach waypoint Dutno, which is about 20.6 DME from the Vancouver VOR, and on radial 292 from the Vancouver VOR. And there we would enter a hold at 200 knots, standard left-hand, actually, sorry, not standard, left-hand patterns, usually standard is right-hand, left-hand holding patterns there at Dutno. All right, moving on to the vertical profile here, we can immediately see the various fixes again along here with their altitudes. So Goreg, we need to be above 3,000. So generally the line underneath means that you need to be at or above that altitude. So Goreg, we need to be at or above 3,000. At Agnad, we need to, again, be at or above 3,000 at that particular point. Along heading 263, we can see the glide path here is 3 degrees. And then at Totem, once again, we need to be at or above 1,700. At Totem itself, we can be as low as 1,520 if we're exactly on the glide path. Also here, we can see our touchdown zone elevation is 8 feet, and the elevation of the airport is 13 feet. So that means that there's an average incline of about 5 feet on this runway, so not a lot. We also see here the minimum decision altitudes. Actually, you know what? Before that, we're going to look at this little bit right here, the missed approach section. So it says missed approach, climb 420, heading 263. So it's runway heading. We'd climb up to 420 feet. And climbing right turn to 3,000, heading 294. So we climb up to 3,000 feet, heading 294. So as we could see up on the horizontal approach plate, that's this bit here. And we intercept the outbound radial of Pitt Meadows 261, again, as we discussed earlier, to Dutno, and then shuttle 5,600 to BPOC, which would be the next waypoint. All right, so second last section on here, we are going to look at the minimum decision altitude section, or the minimum section. We see the categories listed here. I'll get to that in a second. The types of approaches and the altitudes listed. So categories, there's 4 categories actually. There's technically 5 categories. Sorry, correction, 6 categories, A, B, C, D, E, and H. However, the common ones are A, B, C, and D. So what category do you think? What category? What does it mean even? So categories are just basically the VREF speeds, sorry, correction, initial approach speeds of the various aircraft. So speeds between, or correction, speeds 90 knots or less, I believe, are category A. Category B is between 91 and 120 knots. Category C is between 121 and 140 knots. Category D is 141 knots and 165 knots. Category E is 166 knots or more. So, for example, a Cessna 172 has approach speed usually between 60 to 70 knots. They'd definitely be under Category A. However, something like a 737 can be Category C. Usually they have an approach speed around 130, 140 knots in that area. So Category C is pretty good for 737s, A320s, things like that. However, if you're looking at A380s, 747s, possibly A330s, A340s, things like that, 767s, they could be up to Category D with approach speeds between 140 and 165. So Category E technically is only military aircraft and very special military aircraft, as they are approaching at incredibly high speeds, 166 knots. And Category H is helicopters, so they aren't often listed on ILS approach charts. So on the chart, we can also see that all categories have the exact same minimums, which is pretty standard. Sometimes you'll see various aircraft have different minimums. So if we are flying the ILS, DME ILS radar, which is basically the full ILS approach, our minimum decision altitudes, the altitude we'd enter into our barrel ref, which I will show you guys in an upcoming video, would be 209 feet. So if we don't see the runway by 209 feet above sea level, we have to execute a go-around. So this small number is if you are using a radio altimeter as versus a barometer. However, most commercial aircraft today, including the 737, which is what I'll be doing future tutorials on in this series, we will be using the baro reference, so the barometer. And then we can see the runway visual range required, so that's 1/2 mile. So if the visibility drops below a 1/2 mile, you are not allowed to use this particular approach. We can also see if you're just using the localizer, DME, or localizer and radar, so you're not using the glide slope. Whoops, don't need that. If you're not using the glide slope, then the minimum decision altitude is 600 feet, not 6,000. And again, if you were using radio, it would be 592 feet, 592 feet, but you don't, in most cases, you can ignore that. And the minimum runway visibility would be 1¼ mile. All right, so just zoom in a little bit for you guys there. All right, so this column right here will show us how long it'll take to get to the minimum, or sorry, the missed approach point, as it does not have a name. So if we were flying at 70 knots, when we leave totem, we'd start a timer, and as soon as that timer hits 3 minutes, 51 seconds, if we do not see the runway, we have to go around. Our approach speed is 90 knots. The time is 3 minutes. If we do not see the runway by then, we have to go around, so on and so forth, all the way down the list there. All right, so that pretty much covers it for, actually, there's one more thing. All right, so the final thing here, just this little bottom section. Once again, we can see the name of the approach and the effective date. So there and down here. So it's effective from 9:01 Zulu on the 3rd of January 2019 to the 9:01 Zulu the 28th of February 2019. So that's only 8 days from the time I was filming this video. And again, the airport identifier right there. So that pretty much sums it up for this video, guys. Moving on, we will head over to the SID, or Standard Instrument Departure charts.